the population that I'm most passionate about is opportunity youth specifically, because that is who I've been serving kind of the last 4 years. In general, just looking at the 90,000 foot view, um, there are way more loopholes and way more gaps than ever before. There is so much more case management that is needed. There is so much more mental health that is needed, to be addressed. There is more, kind of chaos because things aren't necessarily connecting the way they used to, right? Certain supports have been pulled out of a system. So then that system like either falls or it topples and tries to, come back together, but in a really funky way that sometimes doesn't serve efficiently or at all in some cases, right? And so that's kind of what COVID has disrupted, the continuum of support services. Right. And so, yes, I feel that on the sidewalk. I feel that, on my text messages, with young people that I do mentor, from years ago. I might have met them 10 years ago and I still mentor them now. That is what I'm finding. And so then it requires a specialized approach to case management. It requires a creative approach to case management, and to getting folks' needs met. So last April, when it came to go in the house, was the instruction, right? Go in the house. Everybody needs to go inside. And a lot of young people were not going, were not going inside. But there were reasons for that. There sometimes the home feels more toxic than a pandemic that they say I could catch or bring home to my grandmother, in the street. And this invisible thing that they say is going to get me in the street. But depending on my home, I would rather be outside. And so that was something that kind of had to be addressed very one-on-one. There was also a lot of misinformation with young people, like calling COVID-19 fake and it's only for old people. I can't get it. And, and that speaks to the trust between young people and adults. We have so many kinds of young people, and we do need to seek to understand the roots underneath their behaviors, because those were totally exasperated during COVID. And whether that was they themselves being scared and shaken up by the chaotic nature of the society, or their parents and that mental health trickling down. We don't know what they were witnessing. We don't know why they're outside and refuse to go inside. We don't know why they keep shutting off the computer and refusing to come to class, right? There are so many reasons why the behaviors of our young people present themselves, and especially during a time like this, mental health has to be considered, and our young people do watch us as adults. And so when we are suffering with our own mental health, going through a pandemic ourselves, we cannot ignore the 3-year-old who is feeling that mommy is stressed. We need to, as adults in the society, definitely in general, I talk about this a lot, but it's super important during COVID, to seek to understand what's underneath the behaviors of our young people, and to give them space to express themselves, to then heal, so that they are able to thrive, and to not judge them, to not vilify them and think that their behaviors are just because they're being bad. COVID is complicated, and and their mental health is complicated, and we just need to give some extra grace and patience, as we move forth, especially as the transition and we now are coming into a new chapter, of the pandemic.
The Southward Promise neighborhood, we provide a coordinated pipeline of services and resources that guides and supports families so that children can live healthy in healthy homes, succeed in school, and contribute to their communities and thrive in life.
As a result of COVID, we have had to shift just about all of our programming. When the world shut down in March of 2020, we came together and knew that we needed to put a call to action out to our partners, out to our funders, out to the community about the urgent needs that our families were facing. And some of that included food, baby supplies, diapers, formula, wipes. And once we were able to get that message out to our people, to our network, it was a matter of trying to figure out how we were going to get these supplies to them. So we launched a tech support hotline, and it allowed the Clinton Hill community, the South Ward of Newark community, to be able to reach out through this text line and let us know what their needs were. So some of those needs that came out of those calls, of course, were, food and baby supplies. We were already taking care of that. Financial assistance, emergency resources and cash assistance. People were sent home. People weren't allowed to go back to work unless they were deemed essential. So we started to provide emergency cash assistance. And this was before the very first stimulus became a thing. People had no idea how they were going to pay their rent, how they were going to keep their lights on, how they were going to keep their cable on. Kids were shifted to remote learning. So we also started to bridge that digital divide by trying to ensure that the students in our schools had the computers that they needed. But like the entire world, Chromebooks were on back order, as well as trying to provide our families with hotspots. In addition, we all know that COVID took many lives, and so our one-to-one virtual support services with our partner Imagine Center for Grief was heightened. So you could call in for any of those supports. Oh, and we also offered just one-to-one virtual support with a master level social worker to ensure that families had the supportive solutions and tools to navigate this uncertain time. So with this became like our COVID response hotline. So I definitely think because of COVID, we know that children's health, parents' health, health in general, it has to be more of a priority. We knew this going into the work that we were currently doing before COVID, but even more so now because of COVID, we realize how super important and vital it is that families have a medical home that they can take their children to for wellness checkups, for checkups for themselves, to get the vital medicines or dental appointments, instead of always having to rely on the hospital.
We've worked really, as Jasmine mentioned, in collaboration with a lot of different partners, and to get through a lot of what we've gone through with COVID is to rely on our partnership to leverage and scale up the work that we're doing to support families, children and families, and so continue to collaborate across with various organizations to ensure that students and families and children are receiving as much support as they need.
So my name is Tamara Brown. I am a financial coach at New Community Corporation in Newark, New Jersey. I actually work in a part of New Community that's a vocational school called New Community's Career and Technical Institute. My role here is to work with the students and community members to help them build their credit, to help them address financial concerns, and to help them with goal planning so that they reach their financial goals. Well, the first biggest thing that changed is I don't do in-person appointments anymore, which has thrown a lot of people for a loop. It's been a little bit difficult too with the technology divide, but I've been able to kind of make appointments work. The next largest thing that's changed was the direction of the appointments, really. So most people before COVID, when they would come to me, would really be interested in working on their credit. But now the appointments are more signing people up for social services. Most people were calling me because they got laid off. And they weren't sure how long it was going to be, whether they even should file for unemployment, would they qualify. And there was a lot of miscommunication from employers who was telling some people that they didn't qualify because they may have left their job before their job closed due to lack of childcare. So I had a number of young ladies that actually quit because the schools closed before companies did. And when they quit, they were quitting knowing that they probably would be denied for unemployment insurance because they were quitting their job. They weren't fired or laid off. When in fact, those people were eligible for unemployment insurance. And I had to walk them through the differences in how to fill out these applications because they were affected by COVID. Even though they weren't laid off from their employer because of COVID, they quit because schools closed because of COVID. And I can't tell you how many people that came to me asking me to work with them on redoing their budget, on trying to figure out how to stretch whatever funds they do have and the last paycheck that they have coming in, calling me, should I pay this bill? Like, I have X amount of dollars and I don't know when we're going back to work, so should I pay my credit card bill? Should I not pay my credit card bill? Like, I was working on my credit and I don't want to ruin it, and things of that nature. Appointments have gotten, in recent months, back to some of the things that we were working on pre-pandemic. People are going back to work, or they realized they go back to school and change the trajectory of their career. But a big detriment to that is childcare still. There's still not as much access to childcare, to safe and affordable childcare, as there was pre-pandemic. And pre-pandemic, it was still hard to get safe and affordable childcare. And that's actually keeping a lot of people from entering into fields that they would like to enter into that might make them more money, or going back to school to get into a field that might make them more money because they don't have access to quality, safe, affordable childcare.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the release of ACNJ's Newark Kids Count. This is the 25th year that we produced this publication, and we're very excited to be here today and to see you all join us and to have the wonderful program that we have ahead. As the state starts to open up after 2 years of the pandemic, data is beginning to emerge about the impact on children and the well-being of children and families in the face of COVID. I have to say, however, that not all data is available, as we have produced in prior years. But this year's report provides a baseline of how Newark children and families were faring pre-pandemic. It includes as much data as we were able to secure, and it also includes some new data to give us greater insight into any changes that have come out of COVID that we can identify immediately. Data such as the student to teacher ratio, which is a critical issue as we look at the impact on education. As always, our goal is to ensure that policymakers, advocates, stakeholders, and the community have reliable data to impact on decision making. I want to thank our funders for making this report possible, the Annie Casey Foundation, the Prudential and Victoria Foundation. I'd like to welcome Tiffany Jackson from Prudential. She's our program officer at Prudential. And also to acknowledge Irene Cooper-Bosch from the Victoria Foundation. Irene is a longtime supporter and advocate who is retiring next month. And I just want to acknowledge the impact she has made in Victoria's commitment to the children and families in Newark. And I'd also like to welcome Craig Drinkard, who will become the new executive director of the Victoria Foundation. And thank you all for being here. I know as I was looking at the participant list, we have representatives from the ACNJ Board of Trustees, other funders, Newark and state officials, our partners, our donors, and Newark residents. You are all advocates for better outcomes for Newark's children and families. So let me tell you what the agenda is going to be like for our program this morning. In a minute, it's going to be my honor to introduce Senator Teresa Ruiz. She will be followed by Alana Vega, who is ACNJ's health policy analyst. She will walk you through the data that's in this year's report. And then Mary Coogan, ACNJ's vice president, will moderate a discussion among Newark parents on the impact of COVID. There'll be a lot of time for questions after Alana's presentation and after the panel discussion. So please post them in the Q&A or in the chat. And also the full report will be available online at www.acnj.org. And let me just extend a thank you to the ACNJ staff who made this report possible. Mary Coogan, Alana Vega, and Alina Siddiqui, who is our new Kids Count coordinator, as well as our technical crew, Catherine Falegi, who makes this webinar possible. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Teresa Ruiz, who represents Newark and Trenton and is a true champion for children. I think it's safe to say that every major piece of legislation affecting children in our state has either been led by or supported by Senator Ruiz. And last year, she succeeded in the enactment of what is called the Universal Home Visiting Law, which allows every person who gives birth in New Jersey, who adopts or fosters a child or has a stillbirth, to have a visit by a nurse within 3 weeks of that episode. This is such an exciting development in New Jersey, making New Jersey only the second state in the country to offer home visiting to everyone. And the Department of Children and Families is engaged in a process to make sure that that program is implemented in the way it was intended. And it was Senator Ruiz's leadership that made that possible. In addition, the senator made history this year as the first Latino woman to become Senate Majority Leader, an incredible accomplishment in a long and stellar career. So Senator, it is my pleasure to welcome you this morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, Newark. Good morning, New Jersey. Good morning, moms. Good morning, child care takers and educational professionals. Truly, it's an honor to be connected with all of you, even if it's in this new frame of connection. I wish we could have been in person. I can only hope and pray that next year we will be outside hugging each other and celebrating the work that we will have accomplished this year. A huge debt of gratitude to ACNJ and all the fierce women who lead in not solely bringing to the forefront on an annual basis the needs of our families and children, but for consistently reminding us that they are the compass of where we should be when it comes to policy and good common sense practices in the state of New Jersey. Listening to some of the presentations at the beginning, and look, I know that there are phenomenal men probably on this webinar, but there is no doubt that you have seen now already in the beginning of this half-hour presentation, women who are embedded, who are committed, because we know that this work is going to get done and it's going to get fulfilled by phenomenal leadership that is structured by women and being led by women, because we've always understood the critical importance of childcare in the state of New Jersey. You heard some of the statistics with COVID. I like to flip it a little bit and say COVID-19 lent power to my agenda. It elevated issues that I've been advocating and screaming for nearly a decade. I remember right at the beginning of the pandemic introducing a bill for technology because people automatically just said, we're going to switch. Our classrooms or schools will switch, we'll go remote and it's going to work. Losing sight that so many of our families did not have access to technology in their households, broadband or a hotspot available to them. And then leading this tremendous, almost state and national fight to bring attention to the need of this. So important for all of us to be around the table, because how we think and how we see things is not quite the same how everybody else views it. So AC&J understood that, connected, became a vocal partner in that initiative, and then we launched a technology grant that hopefully has most of our homes in New Jersey connected, because it's 2022. So even thinking about students in the state having access to a piece of computer equipment should be part of the norm pre-COVID. Learning loss. Child care deserts, which we currently sit in one. You heard one of the phenomenal presenters early saying, having accessibility to high quality daycare environments that are safe and nurturing were few and far between before the pandemic. And now, of course, if you were an entity that struggled and were not critically supported during this time frame, your doors could be potentially shuttered. If people didn't recognize that intimately intertwined is our academic infrastructure with the economic forefront of the state, they lost sight of a huge issue that faces not solely New Jersey, but this country. Our child care infrastructure is a common sense approach to supporting the woman, supporting the family, creating incentives early on to eliminate barriers that may be presented to that child in their academic career. That if we make those investments early on, if we secure places where we can drop off our children from 0 to 3, to be sure that they are cared for, we can make different decisions for our family, and that child, when they're entering into a phenomenal universal preschool program in Newark, that they're equipped and ready, and that their trajectory academically can go far beyond whatever expectations we have. That's why I'm so proud that in a couple of weeks, I will be partnering with AC&J to announce a full package of state legislation to celebrate Child Care Week, to recognize the importance of these settings, to support, to create pathways for people to come into this, to retain individuals who've committed themselves to this work, and to really elevate the conversation about the critical need for high quality child care. When I gave birth to my daughter, I was fortunate to stay home because I had accrued some sick time over the 3-month time frame. And when I was making my decision, I was looking at different areas. And quite frankly, anyone who lives in the city of Newark, there are not that many spaces where we can drop off kids within the 0 to 3 time frame. I had access to a car and I have access to resources. There was one place that I was looking at because they had all the cameras, and I felt that I could connect and see her during the course of the day, and it would make me feel comfortable. And I thought that the curriculum in the program was great for her. Would have required me to get in my vehicle and drive a half hour away from home. And then you can only imagine what the cost was for the month. I was fortunate enough to find an individual who was a retired preschool teacher who really helped raise her during that time frame, because still we live in a number one power country that doesn't recognize the importance of having the mother and the child bond. There is no reason why we don't do what other countries do. I am jealous of Germany's advocacy and their policy when it comes to women and their maternal care when they're staying at home. So many European countries understand that the first year is a critical year for both the caretaker and the child. And so I hope that one day in my daughter's lifetime, when and if in fact she decides that she wants to bring a human being into this world, that she will be afforded more opportunities than just a struggling 12 weeks that it is at a percentage of pay, that it's longer, that it's extended, that she has choices where she can drop off that child for them to develop those efforts, that it wouldn't have to be a decision that she has to make because she has to decide whether she's gonna work or stay home. And that those kind of thoughts is what governs what I intend to do in the next couple of years and what I have done at the state when it comes to policy. I am grateful for AC&J. I'm grateful for all of you who are here. I'm grateful for the women who are leading this charge at the forefront. Good practices, early investment, common sense approach, understanding the intertwined infrastructure that we have here. If our academic settings and our childcare settings fail, our economic frontier fails. That when that fails, or when a decision has to be made, that it is the woman who loses out the most, because we are the ones that are making the decisions to stay home. That the she cession from our employee workforce was a real and legitimate thing, that when the doors open, there are less women sitting in desks and in corporate spaces because they made different decisions made in the best interest of their family. That is not a choice we should have to make. We should be protecting every single human being, giving them the freedoms of choice, ensuring that children have a place to really bloom and grow, setting the academic support and foundation so that we develop the most optimal human being at the end of their high school career, making a decision whether they're going to go into a higher academic setting or into a career workforce. There should never be an individual that finds himself at that crossroads without having the next step to go on to. That is something that I'm committed to, something that I could consider myself a huge advocate, consider me a partner, and let's move New Jersey forward with the face and the vision of a mother and a child, with the hope and the dreams of all of our families who raise that next generation to have a better quality of life. Let's create that New Jersey for every single human being that calls New Jersey home, regardless as to who they love, what they look like, what accent they may have, or if they have a social security number. Let's make New Jersey great based on the foundations of what we do in early childhood settings. Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you, Senator Ruiz, for getting us started with that very inspirational welcome. And I'm so excited to partner with you in the legislation you are about to introduce to really reimagine childcare. Thank you so much. I do want to answer a question that's in the Q&A before I turn this over to Alana. Someone asked a question about whether we have universal preschool. We do not, not yet. Preschool actually has been in New Jersey for almost 20 years, thanks to a Supreme Court decision. And school districts like Newark have been offering high quality preschool for all of that time. For a long time, that program was limited just to the 31 lowest income districts in the state. Since Governor Murphy came into office, he has invested in preschool expansion, and there are now many other districts across the state that are offering high quality preschool to some of their 3 and 4-year-olds, not all. That expansion funding is not for all children yet. But last year, when Governor Murphy announced the next round of preschool funding, he stated that he wants to see universal preschool in New Jersey within 10 years and charged the Department of Education to develop a strategic plan to meet that goal. And that plan is now in process. It is exciting, but to Senator Ruiz's point, we also have to look at what happens to children before preschool, infants and toddlers, because for those children, childcare is their early education opportunity. And I think we're on a pathway to make New Jersey a strong birth to kindergarten state with all the advancements that have been made. So thank you for your question. And again, thank you, Senator Ruiz. And now I'll turn it over to Alana.
So good morning, everyone. Apologies for that slight delay. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you, Seal, and thank you, Senator Ruiz, for your leadership and for your remarks. And we're really thrilled to have you here to sort of kick off this Kids Count discussion this morning. As Seal mentioned at the top of the agenda, my name is Alana Vega. I'm a health policy analyst at ACNJ, and I'm going to be sharing some of the data from this year's report. As a reminder, I'm going to cover a number of different issue areas that are in this report, so I'll be jumping around a lot, right? It's early in the morning, so I'm going to make sure you guys are awake and jump through a bunch of different data points. But as a reminder to folks, this webinar is being recorded, and both the recording and my slide deck will be shared with those who are in attendance. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function. The chat, we'd love to hear from you, but should be used for comments and sort of feedback. It's easier for us to keep track of all questions using Q&A, so just a general reminder. So I'd like to start off by thanking our funders. This work is made possible by the generous support of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, the Prudential Foundation, and the Victoria Foundation. And we thank them for their support as we enter our 25th year of producing Newark Kids Count reports. And as Seal mentioned, many thanks to Irene Cooper Bosch, who's retiring from the Victoria Foundation. We thank you for all your support and hard work in helping make Newark Kids Count great. And many congrats to Craig Drinkard as he moves into the executive officer position. Thank you both for your support, and thank you to all our funders. Before we get into the data portion of our presentation, I do want to lift up a new endeavor happening here at ACNJ. Just this year, we began our first Newark Kids Count Future Policymakers program. We're working with a talented group of Newark-based young people who are passionate about both policy and advocacy. And this partnership is a youth-led effort to identify and tackle Newark-based issues impacting young people. We are working with the very talented Kalina Berryman, who you will also see on our panel later this morning. And this group of young people will be presenting their ideas about different policies and improvements for the city of Newark in the summer. So be on the lookout for information about that event. And of course, once again, this work would not be possible without the support of both the Victoria Foundation and the Prudential Foundation. So thank you both. So I mentioned that I'm going to be covering a lot of data, but if you are truly interested in looking at more data, we have a wealth of information beyond our Newark Kids Count book on our website. If you go to acnj.org, we have an entire county dashboard where you can browse data for all 21 counties and the state of New Jersey. The data are also disaggregated by race, so a wealth of information there. Additionally, the National Kids Count Data Center, maintained by the Annie E. Casey Foundation, is an excellent resource for New Jersey data as well, and as well as data for other states and the nation relating to children and families. So please check both out. There are so many different resources on child well-being data that ACNJ makes available to folks, so we encourage you to utilize them. So for those of you who have attended our Kids Count events in the past, you are familiar with this slide, but it's important for me to remind everyone that our data are from publicly available sources. So I say that they're our data, but they're not really our data. The Kids Count reports are really wonderful because we take data from these different publicly available sources and we pull it and analyze it and put it into one place for you so that you're not going to many different resources to find the most current information relating to children. And as I mentioned, there is more data on our website, but we do get most of the data for the Newark Kids Count book and for our Kids Count books in general from a variety of federal, state, and local sources. So I have to start our presentation before we get into the data with a discussion about the impact of COVID-19 and data, right? So many things have been upended by the COVID-19 pandemic, and data is also one of them. Most official sources of data, as we know, take some time to collect, right? To verify, to assess, all of those things take time. Unfortunately, that means that we still do not have a complete picture of the true impact of the pandemic on child well-being because of some of that data lag that has always been present in official sources of data. That lag aside, there are still some limitations to the data that are available that were specifically caused by the pandemic. Several indicators that most folks will be used to seeing in our Newark Kids Count report are notably absent this year. These include school meals, chronic absenteeism data, and standardized test scores. Chronic absenteeism and school meals are difficult to compare because of the ways instruction changed over the pandemic. Virtual instruction, in the case of school meals, meant that meals were distributed in different ways when virtual schooling was in place. And even after in-person school resumed, school meals were still distributed differently than in the past due to flexible federal waivers. As we know, standardized testing was postponed and rescheduled for this past fall. I know that tests are currently happening in the spring, but again, that data is going to take time to collect and time for it to be released publicly. And then probably one of the biggest gaps in data that we have is the lack of 1 year American Community Survey estimates from the US Census Bureau for 2020. So the pandemic created challenges surrounding the typical outreach that the Bureau does for the American Community Survey, which is really the premier source for so much of the data frequently used in our Kids Count reports. ACS data provides poverty estimates, median income information, housing data, and health insurance rates for the nation, all the way down to the block and tract level in individual cities and municipalities. We do have some American Community Survey, which are 5-year estimates, but we will have to wait until the fall of 2022 to see what will be available for 2021 data. So not having those 2020 ACS estimates for 1-year data means that the most recent data in our Newark Kids Count report on some of those areas are for 2019. So with all that being said, despite feeling a little bit like this turtle here at times in our efforts to find the most current data impacting children, as a result of the hard work and dedication of ACNJ staff, especially our new Kids Count coordinator, Alina Siddiqui, we are pleased to present this Newark Kids Count report to you. Though ACS data are only available as of 2019, it still gives you a sense of conditions pre-pandemic, and those data provide important context. And I'll talk about that in my coming slides. We did also make some new additions to the book this year. Some of those new additions include data on school staff, and although those data are from the 2019-2020 school year, again, they provide important context, and there's something we would like to continue to report moving forward in these Newark Kids Count data books. And so it's something we will continue to monitor over time. So with that, let's start by discussing some of the demographic data in the book. Though this is not part of the book, I just want to recognize that Newark is still New Jersey's largest city. For folks who remember, the decennial census happened in 2020, where we count every person living in the United States. And for those who may not know, there was a bit of a competition about whether Jersey City would surpass Newark's population in 2020, but Newark still has bragging rights. It is still New Jersey's largest city, at least until 2030. So I just wanted to flag that. To provide some additional context, our 2019 data show that 50% of the city's child population are Black or African American, and 43% are Hispanic or Latino, and 10% were some other race, and finally 7% identified as non-Hispanic white. And as a reminder to folks, again, if you have any questions, please use that Q&A function. We'd love to hear from you. And a note on this slide, folks should be aware that if we were to add these percentages, they would not total to 100%, and that is because being Hispanic or Latino is considered an ethnicity, which is separate from race from most official federal reporting sources. It's a bit confusing to folks, but it does mean that folks can be both Hispanic or Latino and another race, unless specified. So transitioning now to some economic data, like I had said earlier, I'm going to keep you guys awake. We're going to be jumping around from different data points. You can see that the median income of families with children here from 2015 to 2019. And as you can see, all 3 geographies saw an increase in the median income between 2015 and 2018. For Essex and Newark, however, the median income dropped slightly. So New Jersey is the green, the red is Essex, and the blue is Newark's median income for families with children. I show this slide to give everyone a sense of where we were before the pandemic. As we know, the cost of goods has increased dramatically since 2020. And given that Newark has had a lower median income than other parts of the state, it's important to remember that when we think of solutions to help folks recover from the economic turmoil wrought by the pandemic. And related to the issue of cost and affording basic needs, I wanted to share some data regarding New Jersey SNAP benefits. So between 2017 and 2021, we saw the number of children receiving NJ SNAP benefits increase after years of steady declines. These data are point-in-time snapshots from June of each year. And so here you can see that between 2018 and June of 2020, numbers for Newark were on the decline. But then the 1-year jump between 2020 and 2021, we saw an increase of nearly 12,000 more children, which is an increase of 50% in the number of children receiving NJ SNAP benefits. And while we don't have poverty statistics and other indicators for 2020 or 2021, I think that this increase in SNAP gives us some sense of the level of need. And it's important to note that this increase is across the state, right? In New Jersey, the NJ SNAP child case number of children receiving SNAP increased by 21%, and in Essex by 29% between 2020 and 2021. So again, this is not just something that's happening in Newark, it's happening across the state. Moving into some health indicators, here we have the breakdown of births by trimester in which moms began receiving prenatal care. This is also known as prenatal care onset. So we can see in all three geographies, Newark, Essex, and New Jersey, more than half of mothers giving birth in 2020 received prenatal care beginning in their first trimester. And when we look at the data for the second trimester, which is the orange portion of this bar graph, we see that combined with the first trimester, over 85% of women in Newark received prenatal care either beginning in their first or second trimester in 2020. So the percentage of women who do not receive prenatal care, which is in red, is roughly 5% in Newark. That's a very small percentage of those giving birth in 2020. So when I look at these data, I see a great deal of opportunity to make inroads and connections in providing support to folks giving birth across the city. Shifting to another important measure of infant health, according to the most recent infant mortality data, Newark saw its infant mortality rate drop from 8.1 in 2018 to 5.6 in 2019. Now, again, this is one of those indicators that takes time to collect. Infant mortality data tend to be older every year that we report them. And although they are pre-pandemic and they tend to be older, I think it's really important to highlight this, particularly because we are seeing this decline in the infant mortality rate in Newark and not across the state and in Essex County. And now Newark is much closer to the state rate and is actually on par with the county rate. And I want to recognize that reducing the infant mortality rate is a priority of First Lady Tammy Murphy's Nurture and J initiative, particularly for babies born to Black women and other women of color. So again, this is a really important trend that we're going to continue to monitor as more recent data come out. Moving now to another aspect of health, these are asthma admissions and ER visits relating to asthma among children. So inpatient asthma admissions, which is the blue line at the bottom of this graph, had been steadily declining for a number of years. ER visits for asthma had been slightly more consistent with some fluctuation from 2016 to 2019. However, in 2020, we see asthma-related ER visits take a rather steep decline, and inpatient admissions also declined in 2020. So our assumption was that this trend was probably COVID-related, right, reflecting sort of hospitals' ability to care for patients who weren't dealing with COVID, as well as some fears among families to at the risk of exposing their children to COVID at hospitals. But we'd welcome any thoughts folks might have. Please, share some comments in the chat. Do you have any insight into these asthma trends? Right, this is purely conjecture on my end. I can pull all the data and Alina can pull all the data, but we really value the information and input from folks working on the ground. So would love to hear from folks in the chat what they think might be impacting these numbers. Now to transition to children under CP&P supervision, CP&P, Child Protection and Permanency, formerly known as DIFUS. We were seeing before the pandemic that the number of children under CP&P supervision was steadily declining across the state. And you can see here that the out-of-home placement numbers, which is children residing in foster care, in Newark in particular, declining between 2017 and 2019. And then we see an even steeper decline between 2020 and 2019. There could be a variety of different factors influencing that very sharp decline, but I do want to acknowledge that some of the consistent declines we were seeing before 2020 in the under supervision population are a result of ongoing reforms in the New Jersey Department of Children and Families. Before I go on to my next data point, and we mentioned childcare at the top of this presentation today, I want to provide some context about childcare center closures and reopenings. So on March 25th, the governor issued an executive order which mandated the closure of licensed childcare centers beginning April 1st of 2020, unless they served the children of essential workers. So childcare centers were closed unless they were serving those children of essential workers. And then on May 29th, the governor announced another executive order that permitted centers to reopen in June, so long as they adhered to specific health and safety standards. And so those standards included limitations on the number of children who could be in childcare classrooms. And I'm just setting this up for the next slide. We can see the impact of those executive orders reflected in the number and capacity of childcare centers operating in Newark and across the state in 2020. So the number of children childcare centers were licensed to serve also drastically dropped given the COVID-related restrictions. You can see that at the bottom of this slide in 2020, that number dropped substantially to just shy of 5,000. But an important note, as so many have echoed on this call, the childcare industry as a whole was very fragile prior to the pandemic. Many centers operated on constrained budgets, and then the pandemic weakened that already fragile industry. ACNJ has done and continues to do a great deal of work at addressing the shortage of affordable quality childcare, as well as advocating for stronger childcare infrastructure across the state. I want to stress that the 2021 numbers here might make it seem as though the crisis has been resolved, but the industry is still in need of support. So you can learn more about our ongoing efforts to improve the infrastructure of childcare and the supply of workforce. I encourage you to visit our website or to reach out to a member of our early learning team, and their contact information is listed on the staff page of our website. But also check out the chat, because we'll be sharing some helpful links to our Reimagine Childcare campaign. So moving on to some of the data from the education section of our report, we did see a decline in preschool enrollments across the state. This is after years of relatively consistent enrollment over time in Newark. But between the 2019-20 school year and the 2020-21, that's always a tongue twister for me, school year, the number of children enrolled in Newark preschool dropped by more than 1,200 students. This is something that we need to continue to monitor. But as a reminder, preschool is not a requirement, right? And some of this drop in enrollment might be a reflection of parents choosing not to enroll their children because of virtual learning. I think many folks who are in attendance today recognize that parents of preschoolers had a very different role to play in assisting with remote learning than perhaps parents of high school students, who are usually more independent, right? And so I think that's what we're seeing in some of these numbers. But again, I welcome folks' perspectives. Please comment in the chat. So folks who are regular Kids Count attendees have seen a slide similar to this in the past. Unlike preschool enrollment, overall total enrollment across Newark held steadier. You can see Newark Public Schools enrollment in blue on the left-hand side. Enrollment remained relatively consistent since the 2016-17 school year. However, reflecting a trend that extends further back beyond the data shown on this graph, Newark's charter schools continue to see their enrollment steadily increase over time. So currently 64% of public school students are enrolled in NPS, and then the remainder are enrolled in Newark's charter schools. Looking now at students who matriculated into college, on the far left, we can see that district-wide in 2019, just over half of NPS graduates enrolled in higher education, either a 2 or a 4-year school. In 2020, that had declined to just below 43%. Similar trends occurred across racial groups. In the fall of 2020, about 48% of white students and 41% of Black and Hispanic students enrolled in college. And then across all the other demographic groups on this slide, we saw that college enrollment declined. These data might look familiar to folks who attended the release of our COVID-19 and college snapshot, which we released over the summer. And I'm calling back to that snapshot, which you can access through our website, because I want to provide some context for Newark's college enrollment rates. Declining college enrollment, like so many of the things we've been talking about today, is not just a Newark issue, but a national one. Nationally, enrollment declined in the fall of 2020 as well, thanks to data we were able to obtain from the National Student Clearinghouse. And more recently, they produced a report showing that enrollment declined in fall of 2021 again. So we're seeing 2 years of declining college enrollment. And in that fall 2021 data, we saw that the steepest drops occurred among community colleges and 4-year for-profits in fall of 2021. So again, these trends are something we continue to watch, but also something that I want to flag about how things will look different in providing support for folks who are sort of leaving high school and entering college and career. I think we will have some work to make sure we're circling back to those folks who have recently graduated and making sure that that transition is smoother because of so many of the sort of uncertainties that have happened over the last few years. So at the top of this presentation, I mentioned that we reported student to staff ratios for the first time in our Newark Kids Count report. And this was a result of some of the feedback we heard from those recent Newark graduates we spoke with when we did our snapshot on COVID and college. Many spoke about the need for more support from guidance counselors And although many of the folks we spoke with acknowledged that guidance counselors were frequently spread too thin, right, they sort of carried both, wanting more services, but also recognizing the limited capacity of counselors to provide those services. So according to the 2019-20 school performance report, NPS as a district, this is across all grade levels, so it's not just unique to high school, had an average of 538 students for every one counselor. New Jersey as a whole has 350 students to every one counselor. So Newark's ratio is higher than the state's, but it should be noted that the American Counselor Association recommends a ratio of 250 students to every one counselor. So both Newark and New Jersey exceed that national recommendation. But I think in the context of this declining college enrollment, it's really important to flag the importance of guidance counselors in providing that connection to career and college opportunities for young people leaving high school. I'm going to end with some juvenile justice related data. Here we can see that among juvenile admissions to Essex County detention, Newark has consistently represented over 50% of the county's admissions. The rest of the municipalities in Essex County comprise the remainder of admissions. Though Newark is the largest city in New Jersey, and by definition, Essex County, Newark's child population is about 37% of Essex County's total child population under age 18. So I think we can see a very clear overrepresentation of Newark youth in Essex County detention. Of note, though, we did see that between 2019 and 2020, admissions to Newark youth to Essex County detention declined after several years of relatively consistent admission numbers. And this is something we just want to flag for future monitoring, and we will be keeping an eye on it in our kids count data. So with that, I'm going to open it up to any questions that folks may have. As a reminder, please follow us on social media. And if folks find that they have additional questions after this program concludes about the data, we encourage you to reach out to us. I've included Alina's contact here. Alina became ACNJ's Kids Count Coordinator in October 2021 and compiled the data in this report. So please give Alina some at-home applause for completing her first Kids Count report. I'm still going to be here at ACNJ, but I'm very happy and thrilled to pass the Kids Count baton to Alina. So I'll turn it over if anyone has any questions about the data I presented in my slide deck.
Okay, so Alana, great job, great highlights. People did ask whether this is going to be available, and just want everyone to know that your presentation will be posted on the ACNJ website today. One of the questions is whether you can provide a breakdown of the post-secondary enrollment data by traditional Newark Public School versus charter high school grads.
So I can't provide an aggregate number, but you can, we do have the data listed by high schools in our Newark Kids Count report for the most recent school performance report data. So I don't know the exact page number, but it is by individual high school. So you can't compare charter schools as a whole to NPS as a whole, but you can compare individual schools to one another.
Another question was whether or not we know if there's any efforts being made to recruit or increase enrollment in state-funded pre-K. And I'm thinking that's yet to be seen. I don't know if anybody else who's attending has any comments on that.
I do not know. I think that would be a question for Cynthia Rice on staff. So happy to connect whoever the person asking the question to Cindy, who is our preschool expert at ACNJ.
Okay, and the last question, the comment was that it seems that Newark is doing extremely well in its care for children in terms of reduced mortality rates. What programs do we attribute this to? And again, I'm not sure that we have, the perfect response. I'd be curious to hear from other people who are in the audience today. I mean, I think, as you indicated, Mrs. Murphy's effort under Nurture NJ, there's been a great focus on this, but I don't know that there's any specific program that we would say was the cause of the reduction. Any other thoughts?
Right, I agree. I think when I saw the data, I was really intrigued, and I know that there's a lot of different programs happening in Newark and a lot of different pilots that have occurred over the years. So I would be curious if any folks who are part of those are in attendance today and can comment in the chat about some of the work that's going on around providing support and care for expectant mothers. And any other questions, Mary?
Nope, those are all the, oh, wait, there might be one more.
And as a reminder to folks, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A as opposed to the chat.
Oh, I do see a response. I think this is with reference to preschool, that the Early Childhood Newark Board of Education is always recruiting for preschool. Thank you for letting us know that. And I also think in terms of the mortality, I think the fact that more moms are getting prenatal care earlier is also helping.
Right.
Ensure that we have healthier babies. Let me see. One. Nope, I think that might be it.
So any questions, as I said, please feel free to reach out to Alina or myself. We're happy to answer any questions, and we will share my slide deck with folks who are in attendance, and will be posted to our website.
Okay.
So,
and
thank you.
All right. So with that, I would ask our parent panelists to unmute and turn their video cameras on. All right. Welcome. Okay, so as we just heard, the data provides an important part of the picture of how children are faring. But we also need to understand the stories behind that data and the reasons why the data might be trending in one direction or another. So I'm Mary Coogan, Vice President of ACNJ. And as you've just heard, the data that we have today is just the beginning to show how children and families were impacted by COVID-19 and the subsequent pandemic shutdown. So we thought we should ask some parents from Newark to tell us what struck them about the data in this year's Newark Kids Count report, and to talk a bit about how the pandemic impacted them and their children and other families in Newark. So I would like to welcome our parent panelists, all working parents: Lizette Morales, Sharika Logan, Kimberly Gonzalez, and Kalina Berryman. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so, and in the interest of full disclosure, I do want people to know that we did share the data report with our parent panelists yesterday or the day before, so they got a little sneak preview in terms of some of the data. So I would just open it up. Does anybody have any initial reactions to the data highlights that Alana shared?
Well, I would like to begin with where it's the racial portions for staff to student for the public schools. I found it surprising when it says students to teachers the ratio is 14:1 when the classes are so very overpacked, overwhelmed because of and we know this is even across the USA, how we're lacking teachers, we're lacking professionals, paraprofessionals, one-on-one teachers for the students. So we have to, and I work with a school here in Newark, North Newark. So I'm talking because of what I also see and what other teachers might be communicating across, looking for ways to resolve this. And the lack of staff, especially specifically the teachers, 14:1, it's pretty not believable for me at this point, and I think it has to do with COVID. Definitely, a lot of teachers resigned. A lot of teachers say, "Okay, give me my package. I'm done. I'm out of here." They took a kind of advantage to say, "Okay, I'm gonna retire early," but also just because of that. And again, this is not only Newark. This is even across the USA. We have to synchronize maybe two classes into one. or if the students are supposed to, go to prep or go to their third class, third period, they can't. So you have a teacher that's teaching different subjects. I'm sure they're qualified for it, but it's so much. The work is so much. And so that's why for me, Fortune Line is interesting, because, for example, in my class, I teach 7th and 8th graders. In my class, I have 27 for 7th graders, and I have 28 for 8th grade, and that's a lot. It might not sound a lot, but if you're a teacher and you're in a classroom and you're dealing with about 55 students, oh, trust me, it's a lot. So I think that's very interesting to find that, and it's just been hard to find a solution. They've even lowered the credit amounts to 30 credits if you want to substitute. So to help the community say, you know what, I'm going to go and teach. But because it's so much information, so much to teach, so much to give, it's pretty overwhelming. And then where it says students to counselors, this is 538 to 1. That is wow. That's a lot when it's, as the lady that was there presented before said, it's 250 to 1. But even so, even in that area, counselors were still lacking that. Even as far as the child study team. And the child study team, we were able to get one-on-ones with the kids in the classroom. It's even hard to get that. And I think that leads to lack of focus for the children that are receiving child study. And I speak for my son too. My son is in high school and he still is part of the child study team. And it is just so interesting the need that we have in the non-public schools, not only the staff, but the students as well. And, just trying to relate, it's hard to try to relate that to the parent and say, hey, if you would also be a voice, we can push probably more of the need that we have for our children. And it's hard to engage parents as well. Only because if you're an engaged parent, you might have to miss work. You might have to, like how we're doing now with this meeting. You might, devote some time. So it's just a trickle effect, a domino effect all the way down the line. And sometimes I wonder, how can we better serve our community and our students, even through the data.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kimberly. There's a little background noise in terms of your presentation, but I do think what I took from it is it's a lot of different factors that have caused a problem. There were teachers who retired. There are teachers who struggled, classroom sizes got larger. And so I think there's probably a lot of work to be done in terms of getting more teachers back in schools and hiring more teachers, right? In order to meet the needs of students, but everybody's had to adjust, parents and students and staff, I would say. What do some other panelists say? I know, Kalina, you work with some older youth. What was their experience in terms of, making that transition from high school into whether they went to college or went on to work or did something else?
So first of all, I just want to say thank you to ACNJ for the Kids Count report. As a nonprofit leader, it is the catalyst for a lot of my work and for a lot of our work. And, Mary, last year, or was it 20, time gets really weird in this COVID world, but I think it was 2020, I called you and Alana in a panic back in 2020 because I was concerned about my students. So yes, I'm a mom of a child with a disability. And, Alana talked about how hard it was for preschoolers to be educated by their parents, but it was exceptionally hard for children, for parents of children with disabilities. And so that's like that mom lens of the impact on young people with disabilities. But my community mom lens had me very much concerned about our high school students and our students who were transitioning out of high school and into post-secondary, their post-secondary world. And in the city, we don't really have mechanisms that support young people after they graduate from high school. So a lot of those systems of support that Aaliyah Berry talked about earlier in the presentation were disrupted because they didn't have the pre-college programs, the after-school programs, the access to the village, where we capture young people in their senior year and say, hey, what are you doing? They didn't have access to that. And so as a result, we see that the college enrollment has dropped. And that is alarming to me. But in addition to that, students who necessarily might not have gone to college, but may have done other post-secondary plans also are probably disrupted, but we don't have data. And so where are the children? Where are the graduates of the class of 2020? Where are the graduates of the class of 2021? What are they doing? Are we creating a system in this city to support them? And so I was so glad that the Kids Count, the snapshot came out to kind of begin to raise that up. And also, not only did ACNJ raise that up, but you created the Future Policymakers program. So now there are 18 to 24-year-olds that have been captured by the village and put into this program where you don't have to be enrolled in anything, just have an interest in advocacy. So in response to that, I do want to raise up two solutions. One, the Abbott Leadership Institute has the Newark Grad Center. So if you're a high school student who is kind of transitioning, you can go there. And then also our Newark Youth Career Pathways program is working to make sure that now we have the class of 2022 that missed out on 2 critical years of high school. Where are they going? And we are activating to support them as well. So, that my babies, like, I'm concerned about them. And I really hope that our city does what ACNJ does and says, let's create something for 18 to 24-year-olds. Let's capture them back because right now, a lot of them are lost. So, just thank you so much for raising that. And I hope we activate like we always do, Newark, when ACNJ shines a light on something for us.
Well, Kalina, your energy will definitely push us to activation. So, and
yes,
thank you. The work you're doing and your help with our Youth Policy Advocates program. I think it's tremendous. And I am really excited about it. We do have a great bunch of young people in that program.
My honor.
And I'm hoping, as you indicated, that as we see more things open, some of those programs that may have had to go virtual or had to shut down can, reopen and provide that support to our high schoolers and other students. So I'm going to, I guess, turn it over to Lizette, if you want to comment, because I do think you had a comment about the preschool and that whole problem or issue about parents trying to have their children attend preschool virtually, right?
Right. So there was actually 2 components of the data that that stood out the most to me, right? So, as you mentioned, when we started, we're working moms, right? And then once we're done with our day, we go to our kids, we go to our families, right? So at work and in my profession, I'm responsible for a bank. And at the bank, this is where we meet families, right? So what's interesting is the data regarding the median average income starting in 2019. So imagine the changes after the pandemic hit, right? You have individuals, you have parents who lost their jobs. You had parents who had no choice because now the kids can't go to school and they have to stay home. And who's going to help them transition from, being in school and then having to sit down in front of tablets or Chromebooks to learn, right? So, and don't even want to mention if you have a toddler in pre-K, right? And then, as Kalina mentioned, if you have a disabled child that's also going to school as well, right? So these are the challenges that a lot of parents were coming across, right? At work, I would meet people where they were and you would see how everything was changing for them, right? Then I can relate because everything was changing for me. We had to be at work. We were one of the individuals in the middle of the pandemic where, although many corporations were bringing work home, in a retail bank, it didn't work that way. We had to figure out how to be there because we had families that needed to come to the bank for their financial needs, right? Then on the other spectrum, there's Lisette coming home and their kids are asking her, Mom, how do I do this math problem? And I don't know, but if you notice, the way they do math now is not how I learned math. So I have 4 kids at home, and their ages are 12, 11, 9, and 3. So for me, it was like, oh my God, I don't want to tell my kids, you're going to have to really pay attention and kind of figure this out because I have no clue. So then I had to go and figure out, and how am I going to communicate with the teachers, and what was the best avenue, or what application we had to download, right? So that I can send a text or send a message to the teacher and say, hey, can you break this down so I can break it down for my kids, right? So now I became the teacher at home. And then I came across decisions, whether or not, once we transitioned from the virtual classes back to in-school classes, was I going to send my preschooler? All my kids started preschool when they were 3. So my baby is the only one who did not. And I chose not to send her because I myself still wasn't confident or secure whether or not I felt comfortable with her being exposed, or whether or not her health was going to be compromised. That was one. And the other one was really, as a single mother, was there enough resources and support outside of my family that would be able to, help with being able to have a preschooler in school and then coming to work, and what all of that looks like, right? Because we all know, as children go back to school outside of COVID, there are other issues that we also deal with, right? We're dealing with transition. We're dealing with, them having to be social again, and what that looks like, and their personalities. And then, when you're parent of more than one child, you have to take into consideration, is there enough support for this, right? So it's interesting to see the data, because it tells me that many other parents had the same either issues or questions that may have arisen throughout the pandemic and where we are now.
Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, first of all, I want to applaud you, Lizette, for being one of our frontline heroes, right? Because you did have to go to work, right? Just like Kimberly, teachers had to be there every day, putting on a good face, whether it was virtual or in person, to really try to help kids learn. So I applaud you both. And Lizette, I really appreciate you sharing the struggles that parents went through in terms of the decisions that had to be made, like whether you do send your child to preschool or whether you keep your child home. I think those are all tough things, and you're not alone. I think a lot of parents had to struggle with those decisions, but thank you for really shedding a light on that and reminding us that it's, there's daily decisions that have to be made. I do think we may have lost one of our parents, so I'm going to send it back to Kalina for a minute. Kalina, you had mentioned that you have a child who has a disability. What was your experience in terms of schools' ability to implement the individual education plans, or, make those adjustments for providing the services when things were virtual?
Yeah, so, this is a personal topic for me. Like, it's, so I'll speak from my own perspective, but also just for parents of students with disabilities in general. My son attends an amazing school. They offered all of his services to him. My son has cerebral palsy. He doesn't walk or talk. He's severely disabled. He's the light of my life. But the reality is that he is a disabled person in this world. And he has 7 therapy sessions a week. And there was no way that mom could work and do all the things that I do and be there 7 sessions a week, in addition to his regular care, feeding him, changing him, and all of those things. It was a really overwhelming time for parents of students with disabilities, beyond measure. And so when we talk about the data lag, like the impact of COVID-19 on students with disabilities is so phenomenal. Even if you look at the post-secondary enrollment and how small the drop, how large the drop was for students with disabilities and English language learners. So, you know, the services were offered, but that was like, my school is like premier, right? And so I worry that schools were not able to offer services virtually. I worry that virtual services are not the same. My hands are not the same as a trained physical therapist's hand. And so the reality is that students with disabilities have lost hundreds of sessions of services. And I had my son's IEP meeting yesterday, and I expected to be informed about his right to compensatory services, which the state has mandated, and it did not come up in my grade school. And so if I had a charge to leave with folks, it would be, please encourage parents of students with disabilities when they have an IEP meeting or even before to ask the school how they can access compensatory services for their children. When I asked about it, I was the first parent to ask that question all school year, and there was no answer. There was no plan. There was no answer because the state has not provided real guidance. And so if Senator Ruiz is here, I'm raising it to her as well. We have to do something about that to make sure that something happens for our children. And the same with preschool. We have to activate around that to make sure that our kids are enrolled and that they don't miss any more of these critical education years. So, you know, that's a personal thing. I'm like on a mission, compensatory services, but you know, now our high school graduates need compensatory services and our preschoolers need compensatory services. So community, we have to activate.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Colleen. I really do appreciate you sharing your personal story. And again, unfortunately, you are not alone because I know the attorney in our office, Nina Peckman, who helps advocate, you know, or helps parents advocate for their children who have learning problems. She has seen an increase in the struggles, but you know, she is sympathetic to the struggle of the school because they, as you know, Kimberly said, they've lost staff. They are scrambling because there are so many students who do need those compensatory services, and especially the children who lost their therapy sessions, et cetera. I think trying to implement and doing any of that remotely was very difficult. And I think now they're scrambling a little bit to try to provide those services. But again, a good thing for the community to advocate around and to really energize around and try to make the connections with community providers to help, you know, really get the kids back up to speed. I don't think Sharika is back on yet, but she actually had an issue about the childcare. So we'll wait.
So Mary, I'm actually going to interrupt you really fast. Sharika is back on.
Oh, terrific. Okay. So Sharika, when you and I spoke, you have a young child and you were one of those parents who scrambled and had difficulties with the childcare, right? So do you want to talk a little bit about that in terms of what you and many other parents have struggled with in terms of accessing affordable quality childcare? I don't know. I don't think, well.
Sharika, you're on mute.
Oh, is that what it is?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, okay, there I see you. All right, great. So did you hear my question?
Yeah, I heard the question.
All right.
Yeah, it was really hard finding like a school that was affordable, like I forgot what programs for parents. I didn't qualify for it because the budget was so high. So it was hard. And it wasn't, my income wasn't even that much over it. So I felt like that was frustrating, looking for childcare after I had my baby. And right now she's still in school.
So I think when we talked about it, just to let people be aware, the actual resource and referral agency programs for parents, they're not the ones who set the guidelines that implement state guidelines, right? In terms of trying to offer parents any type of a subsidy to assist with payment of childcare. So my understanding is that the subsidy is available to parents with certain requirements, but also of household incomes up to 200% of federal poverty. So for a family of four, I believe that's about $55,000. So that's not a lot of money if you then are, you know, paying for childcare. That would be a struggle. If you're a household of two, it's only $36,000. And then, as you indicated, like $1 over and you sort of fall off the cliff, right? And that's
Right, exactly.
it was just a couple of dollars over your income, but they had to deny you the subsidy. So,
Right.
and unfortunately, you're not alone. So I do think there are people working to try to increase the subsidy higher for higher household income. But thank you for sharing your story. Did you have any thoughts of any of the other indicators that Alana shared? Any of the other data?
I couldn't hear earlier. My audio was off, so a lot of things I didn't catch.
Okay. All right. Well, if you have any comments on any of the other panel speakers, then now that you're back, and we're happy you're back, feel free to chime in. Okay.
No problem.
All right. Thank you. So I'm going to go back to Kimberly for a minute, because one of the things we also talked about last week was the drop off in asthma, that was something that you had noted, the significant drop in terms of children who had emergency visits or hospitalizations because of asthma. Did you want to comment on that? I think you're muted. Kimberly, are you? I think you're muted. There you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. And it's
Okay,
a much
I'm sorry.
better
I
connection.
had to dial in because the feedback was bad on the laptop. So I hope you guys can hear me clear.
No problem.
Yeah,
This is a much better connection.
Okay, thank you. So the asthma drop for me was wow. I have a sister that well, she's not in school or anything like that, but she is very, very, very asthmatic. So I, growing up, I would see her, using the tubes and the machine and all that stuff. And I remember when we would take her to the hospital, or she would go, there was so many other teenagers or kids that just by a cough, they have to go because, oh my God, something can happen. And to see a drop like that as of COVID, I'm questioning how severe was the asthma to go to the hospital, or what alternatives are they taking now to treat that asthma? Instead of come to the hospital, call the doctor. You can go straight there and avoid going to the hospital because of COVID, so that people won't, catch the COVID and things like that. So I just found it interesting, and I wonder what, aside from COVID, was the necessary measures so that those people, and I don't think it said the breakdown of ages, right? I don't think it did, but that would have been nice to see if that was, available. Sometimes specific data is just hard to get, but and see what were the measures for them not to go to the hospital. Maybe that could have happened years ago. You know what I mean? As a parent, if my child is asthmatic and every time my child is out of breath, take him to the hospital, whereas now it's out of breath, now it's maybe a call to the doctor. Maybe they say, you know what, come and we already send a prescription. You don't even got to come to the medical office. So you don't have to call out of work. So I just wonder what that drop really signifies, other than, and I think it has to do other than COVID. COVID, I think, is a major part to it. But because of COVID, we see a lot of negative impacts. But COVID has brought a lot of positive things to the table, solutions that before we couldn't do, but now because we have to do it this way, has been actually good. Even from working from home, so many jobs that you couldn't even, you couldn't even call out. You know what I mean? And then it's like, it's Friday, my kids don't have class, we have access now. So, and it's just a trigger of thoughts going just through that one thing, but now it's available to you. So I was just wondering that. My mind goes so many different ways, but yeah, that was something that shocked me, the decrease of it.
But I think it's good to ask the question. So even as I'm listening to you talk, a couple things come to mind. I mean, maybe kids didn't have as many triggering factors, right? So maybe whatever their allergies are, because they were home, there wasn't that impact. But you said something about you can call the doctor. So people did have opportunities for telemedicine, right, during the shutdown, and then could get prescriptions. So maybe people were in touch with their doctors and able to address it before it became an emergency, right? Whereas in the past, maybe they just sent their child off to school with an inhaler and then the child didn't use the inhaler and then it, worsened the asthma. So I think it's definitely worth looking into. And I think there was a comment in the chat from Catherine Wilson that the Healthy Newark Healthy Homes Committee is also looking at this asthma issue to kind of drill down and see what it is, because as you said, this could be a positive, right? That we learn something and maybe we reduce hospitalizations or ER visits for kids with asthma long-term. So that would be great. Anybody else have any thoughts or comments on that asthma issue? Okay, I'm just going to see if there's any.
I just want to add that I don't, if asthma is in that particular data that says specifically says asthma, I wonder what other areas were taken care the same way, right? Or with the same measures without going to the hospital. And what would that drop be? You know what I mean? Like, let's say, for example, migraines. People go to the hospital all the time for migraines. Something, I don't want to call it simple because there's different levels of, really bad migraines. But just an example. So now that COVID hit, what are you doing with that? So that also, if you really even look into that, if you don't have health insurance, you just cut down on your health insurance payments, whatever the hospital bill was. If how does that impact if people are on Medicaid or not on Medicaid? You're using your insurance. How does that impact the hospital and their fundings and their charges? It's just, we look at data, but there's so much more extensions to that. And I just real quickly, I wanted to commend Ms. Berryman because my son, like I said, he's in Child 13, he has IEPs. It's not the same category as your son, but still, he still needs the help and guidance that he needs. But I commend you because I think that a lot of places, not all of them, right? A lot of places, if moms and dads or parents, or even, like Senator Ruth, if they don't make a push, they'll just be comfortable and say, this is what we have, and we can't do nothing else. Well, Ms. Barron was like, well, I was the first one to ask the question all year, and we're almost ending the school year. How is that possible? How many parents are really getting involved? Or maybe they're just like, maybe in their mindset, we're so comfortable with COVID being an excuse that we're like, if we push it, they don't have it. It's all right. We'll just deal with it. Well, you really can't, because if you have a child that is disabled like Ms. Berryman, like she says, her hands are not trained. She can do it best she can because the love of as a mother, you're gonna go above and beyond. But when you can't do something, what are your options except for being that parent that just calls all the darn time and gives you a headache? But guess what? You're gonna find a solution because you don't want to hear me again, right? So it's just. Like
exactly.
If there's parents listening, you know what I mean? If there's parents listening and they say, oh, they have nothing for my child, listen, Newark, and if I can just be blunt, I'm a Newark resident, I was born and raised here. I mean, I lived for a few years in Puerto Rico, but this is my town. And I thank God for all the pushes that we've had in this town for so many years. There's so many different things available. Okay, nonprofits, all this good stuff to you. It's just we lack the knowledge and wisdom of where to go, where to find it. Even if you think you're going to the right person, that person might not know. Listen, go research, Google. Thank God for, Google. Or even us panelists, maybe, you could take our names down or email us, and we can try and help as best as we can. If we don't have, all I can say, we don't know, but there is something out there. Believe me, there's so many people pushing for so many different things. Yeah. Even children that are in disability for a long period of time, look their history, they weren't respected, they weren't cared about. That's a lot of these children were casted into places that they never knew their parents because a disability was like, oh, you're born from, and it's reality. You can look it up in the history books, okay? Mm-hmm. But us parents, we push it. So if you lack anything, I'm sure that advocates for children here They're willing to help. They have so much information to give out. And any parent there that you need help, you are not alone. Believe me, there's a community of people, whether you see it or not on the outside, but there's a community of people that care, that are there for your children, that are here even as parents. You know, even if you're stressed out and you have depression because all this season and you don't know how to cope with this, there are people here to hear you. Just hear you. You don't even have, you know, if you need to come to a room and cry, I don't even know why I'm talking about all this, but we're here for you anyway. Okay, I'm gonna cut it short because I get like.
No, thank you so much. No, really, that's so important for people
Absolutely.
in the community to help. So thank you. Thank you. Do any of the other parents on our panel have any other final comments?
Just that, you know, the one, parents of children with disabilities, you know, you have the right, you can go online, the New Jersey Department of Education, you can read it. It is a decision that is made on an individual basis with the IEP team, and you are a part of that. The IEP team consists of parent, student, professional, school. And so together, you determine what compensatory services, the frequency, and if they're not prepared to have that conversation, it's not their fault. But as Ms. Gonzalez said, if we're not asking for it, there's no reason to put any process in place. So we have to make the ask and we have to push. And if you are the parent or a big brother or a friend of a young person who graduated high school in the last 3 years, call and check on them. Ask them what are they doing with their lives, and then start to kind of direct them into the things that are needed to help them to advance their life. They don't deserve not to have an appropriate future because of a pandemic. You know, grace, someone said earlier, we gave each other grace during COVID. Grace time is over. Now it's time to get to work and take action. So, you know, we have to activate. And thank you again for allowing me to be a part of the conversation.
No, thank you for joining us. Lizette or Sharika, do you have any final comment you want to make?
Sure. I wanted to add, you know, with all the enthusiasm and just the amount, not just from the organization and the parents that are on the panel too, you know, a reminder that, you know, the banks are also here to help you figure out how to manage your funds, right? So sometimes with everything that's changed, there are other opportunities and resources that they are actually helping with and they've collaborated with, right? So, you know, I work for TD Bank, but it's not just TD Bank, where all the local banks have united. They've created a coalition where it's, you know, all hands on deck in trying to figure out how we can help families and how that affects the kids. So, you know, reach out to them as well, because I know they have resources.
Well said. And Ms. Sharika, do you want to add something to our?
No.
No? Okay. All right. So I'm just going to add something because I have a colleague at AC&J who is an attorney who will assist parents if their child has a learning problem, a discipline problem in the school. She is fluent in Spanish. So it's a free service. So if anyone is listening or people have questions, Nina can answer questions, but she can also be an advocate for parents to any school district, not just Newark, but that's a service we do provide statewide. So I just want to end on that note, and I want to thank you all so much for being on this panel. I've learned some things, even though I talked to all of you ahead of time, and I really do appreciate you sharing your stories, but also being so enthusiastic and so encouraging for all the parents in Newark that we can get through this, and people just need to join together and reach out. And like you've all said, there's lots of programs in Newark that can help people. We just need to find them and do a little research. So to the extent AC&J can be that conduit, we are here for that. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank everyone who is in attendance. Alana Vega's PowerPoint will be on the website shortly. The report for Newark Kids Count is already on the website. And thank you all. Please share and put the information out there. Take care.